I don't see anything as a get rich quick. The only way to build true, sustainable, multi generational wealth is through discipline and following proven systems.
How can unconventional financial strategies revolutionize your wealth? Welcome to Seek, Go, Create, where today we're joined by MC Laubscher, renowned expert in alternative wealth strategies and asset investing. MC is the visionary behind Producers Wealth, helping business owners nationwide to craft sophisticated financial plans. He's also the host of the Cashflow Ninja podcast, recognized by Entrepreneur Magazine and listened to in over 180 countries. Tune in today as MC unveils powerful insights on creating financial freedom and securing a lasting legacy for your family. MC, we almost got off track talking about RVing, but welcome to Seek, Go, Create.
Thank you so much for having me, Tim. Look, I've been looking forward to this. And yes, I love the RV conversation we already had. So looking forward to jumping into many topics with you.
I want to talk financial stuff. I want to talk the alternative investing. Got a copy of your book here. We'll talk about this as we go along, but let's just jump into the deep end of the pool here. And first question, I'm going to let you choose. Would you rather answer, what do you do? You know, kind of typical networking question. You're out and about, you bump into people on a plane or something. What do you do? Or who are you that might have a deeper component to it? Pick it and go ahead and answer.
I love it. We're starting deep right away. I would answer who I am. So I'm a husband to Megan. I'm a father to my two lovely children, Christian and Josephine. And I'm just an individual that is always looking for more freedom and striving for freedom in all areas of my life and sovereignty. It's kind of powerful to have a combination of both of those. I grew up in South Africa and I've been in the US since 2001. I grew up during a very interesting time in the country's history. So as a young man, where we went from one type of form of government, you had the apartheid regime, all the way through to, the first democratically elected government. So I still remember as a young man when Nelson Mandela was released from prison. So I lived through all of that. I saw all of that, and I saw the different changes, which was a gift as a young man, really, to see the world for what it is, right? That there's a lot of different ways to look at something. And, seeking the truth became a passion of mine too. And I would say that I'm a truth seeker because I'd love to get all the different narratives that out there, all the different his story, everybody's got a story, and then figure out where the truth kind of lies. And, being able to do that has served me well in other areas of my life when it comes to health, when it comes to finances, relationships, how those work. And yeah, so I would say that, I love to have fun. I love adventure. I'm always learning, always seeking the truth. And I'm just trying to be the best husband to Megan and the best father to Christian and Josephine.
Have you always been a truth seeker? I mean, can you recall that going back to, how old were you in 2001 when you came to the States?
I was 20. I just turned 22. So I would say it started in South Africa because, it was very, very interesting because you had one way of society looked one way and you operated one way. And there was the truth in society at that point. Then it completely flipped on its head. So at that stage, you're like, well, what is the truth? Because these people are saying that, these people are saying the other thing. Then there's, other viewpoints on it too. So where does it lie? I think at that stage, I started to question everything, regardless of where it came from. And I'm like, I got to figure this out for myself because I have a sneaking suspicion that we're not getting the full story from anybody. And it's kind of our job to put it all together. And that was my passion really for history, economics, and eventually finances. Well, I got to figure out how the world works to figure out how the society that I'm living in actually works. And if you put it all together, the three lenses that have really served me well, the first thing is history, and there's different types of history. Everybody's got a different version of it. And these days there are so many of them out there. So you got to look at all the different sides of the story and kind of figure out where does the highest probability lie of what actually happened. And then the second thing then becomes economics. And it's a boring subject at school for people to learn. And, God bless you if you did it at university too, like I did. Very boring of how it's presented. But if you actually think about it, it's one of the most important topics because it's how a society functions, what's happening inside of our households, our neighborhoods, our communities, our societies. And there's different ebbs and flows in an economy. So if you put that kind of with the history, you get a clearer picture of what actually happened. And then you start to look at the financial system, the global financial system. You have financial systems that then you start to really get a good picture of what actually happened. And I'll give an example. So a lot of people in the US learned about the Louisiana Purchase. The French sold off Louisiana to Thomas Jefferson, and everybody is very well familiar with that. But if you take a step back and say, well, why did that happen? They didn't, why did they just sell it off? Why didn't they just keep it? People would still be speaking French there and you'd probably have the same amount of fun and, great cuisine as everything. But why did that actually happen? If you look at history, well, you had two up and coming superpowers competing for the world, which is all the trade routes, right? So you had Great Britain, the British, and you had the French. And the big power play there was, and they were really bumping heads on world trade all over. Because if you can control all the trade routes, that's actually the number one thing of a superpower to control all the trade. What is the number one role of a military of a superpower? To protect global trade, all of the trade routes. So those guys came to a head. They started to go to war. And everybody, of course, knows about the defeat that Napoleon had at Waterloo. That's a very, very well known one. Well, Napoleon was the one that sold the Louisiana. So why did he sell it? So if you look at history, there's some economics behind all of it. But what's the financial side? The Battle of Waterloo was probably one of the biggest, most decisive battles, probably in the last 250 years in the world, because at that stage, it was actually a battle to set up the global financial system for the world at that point. After that defeat that Napoleon had at Waterloo, gold were exchanged in vaults in London. London became the number one financial center in the world after that. So, well, Napoleon sold off Louisiana because he went to war with the banking families in Europe. So there's a couple of ways that you can fund a war. You can raise money from your citizens through taxes, or, everybody's familiar. If you're a little bit older, or maybe you read about it, war bonds was a thing, right? In the other, you could raise it from the citizens. The other thing is you could maybe sell off some assets or natural resources and so forth. And then the other thing is you could borrow the money. You go to someone and, well, where would they borrow it from? Well, the banking families in Europe at that stage, and they were very much put against Napoleon. So he looked at this and like, I don't have an option. I'm going to war with these guys. These guys want me out because I'm a threat to them, right? He was a threat to the existing order at that stage. So I've got to self-fund it. So I don't want to raise taxes because at that stage, the French were also kind of in an economic slump. So I got to go and sell off some assets. So when you put that all together, those three lenses, now you have a clear idea of what possibly happened and how this played out, right? Instead of, if you just had the history, that's one thing. If you just had the economics, that's one thing. If you just had the financial thing. But I think like that really is where my truth seeking started was, growing up in South Africa and realizing early as a young man, like the world is not as presented. There's a lot of things that people are not telling me. And there's a lot of narratives which are conflicting with each other. So let's figure out what actually happened and how things work, right?
Well, it's also usually more than just a paragraph in a history book, which is the Louisiana Purchase is.
Yep.
And that makes it very transactional. Like there was a
Yep.
transaction. America decided, young country with probably barely any money themselves. So we're going to acquire this piece of land from this country. No, there was more going on, just like there's more going on right now that you and
Yep.
I are going to discuss a little bit later. When we talk about tariffs, especially trade, when we
Yep.
talk about other things happening, I want to back up a little bit. I was in and out of South Africa, probably 3 or 4 times in like 95, 96, 97.
Yep.
Sounds like that was the time maybe that you were around your teenage years or something
Mhm.
like that. I would love for us to, before we get too far away from this, I think we've got audiences all over, like you do over at Cashflow Ninja, but we have a heavy US audience.
Yep.
I at times am concerned that US has these blinders on and they don't grasp bigger picture things. So I would love for you to give us a bit of contrast between some things that we call a word you used in your introduction, freedom, and what you saw up to your first 20 something years of life. And you saw a couple variations of it too, by the way. You probably
Yep.
saw a pre 1990, 91 version when, Mandela and others, there's transitions. And then you probably saw another transition when you came here. Just talk about wherever you want to go with it. Contrast what you saw growing up there and then maybe what you saw in '01 when you came over to the US at 22 years old.
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. When I remember too, we had a state-controlled media and newspapers, and they pretended to be independent too, right? But all in all, it's a system, and it's a system of information control. So what you see on television, what you see in the media, what is allowable opinion, and then also what is taught in universities and schools. The apartheid years that I grew in. It's the same kind of thing. So it's different. What I saw when it comes to freedom, I've a lot of libertarian and kind of like, a little bit of ANCAP beliefs too. I think everybody at heart is that who doesn't want to be free, right? And just be able to pursue their own dreams and their own lives and let everybody figure theirs out for themselves. The control is a big thing that I witnessed as a young man. And even in South Africa, where you went from one totalitarian regime, you kind of had that window, which was kind of the honeymoon period where Mandela was released. He got into office. He was in and out as president, and it was basically the honeymoon period of South Africa at that stage. And then after Nelson Mandela, too, you had a different type of character coming in, where the one was more fascist of the apartheid regime. Now you had a much more kind of like communist leaning of these characters coming in. So consequently, in South Africa, over the past 30 years, and the reason why it's in the headlines is because you have actually had people since Mandela left office, and he's, of course, has passed away. And there was a brief period of that honeymoon period where everything was going in the right direction, but these other cast of characters took over. And, now you look 30 years back and you look at where the country's at, and a lot of the stuff, I mean, if you think of the economy, just the infrastructure and systems that most countries rely on, transportation, trains and planes and roads. We have trains that don't even run anymore over there, right? So it's like the infrastructure that everybody depends on to get this machine up and running. A lot of that is gone. A lot of the systems have been destroyed. I mean, South Africa used to be in the top tier of gold producers in the world. I don't even think they're in the top 10 right now. The production with as far as diamonds, other natural resources, mining is a very big industry there. That has suffered. So the economy there, and of course, the unemployment is out of control. You have massive wealth inequality because the upward mobility there is capped. In contrast to what I saw in the United States, where I always say people that were born in the US, you don't know it yet, but you literally won a lottery ticket because the upward mobility compared to there is night and day. Here, there's nothing stopping you. You have people that come from public housing or projects in New York City, like Damon John, that's basically a billionaire. That's a very, very rare, very rare thing, and almost impossible in South Africa. Because even in cities where there is wealth inequality, there is access to services and systems and infrastructure, which they don't have there. So that's led to a lot of people leaving and going different places. The taxation's also out of control. So yeah, I mean, as far as freedom goes, yeah, you have to be cognizant of the control that's in place, and that governments, most of them have have out there. They want to control the narratives. They want to control the media, the stuff that you read, and they want to basically own all of the information and control it so that they can create the reality for you, right? Especially in the past decade, I've seen in the United States, the opportunity that exists here. If you apply yourself and you bring your best talents and your efforts and you work your butt off, the upward mobility is still unmatched. I haven't found any other place in the world that has the same upward mobility than the United States.
Yeah, as we travel, there was a period of time 10, 15 years ago where my wife and I were traveling. We did Australia, New Zealand with something in the back of our mind going, we might leave the US. Nah, the US is still, we got issues, and we'll talk about a couple things here in just a second. We've got
Yeah.
issues. I want to say this though, real quick about South Africa. In fact, it's interesting. I was in the hot tub last night here in our resort we're in with a gentleman who had a background. He's retired now in the mining industry, and he had spent some time in the gold industry. He ran those top
Yep.
operations in South Africa. We had discussion about it. I had met a guy from Tanzania who gave me some Tanzanite years ago. I didn't even know what it was. I threw it in my shoe and went through customs without even knowing I had all this Tanzanite with me. But I always thought, and I do believe this about almost everywhere, that there are beautiful places and resources and beautiful people almost anywhere. And I
Yep.
think that South Africa has all of those in abundance, but yet they struggle to make that work.
The people there are incredible. I mean, some of the most resilient people on the face of the planet. The places are incredible. The tour, just that with tourism alone, I mean, it should be a home run. It should, I mean, that should be the place to go to. And there's a number of other South Africans that have shared the same views that I'm sharing right now. Someone like Gary Player, the golfer, has been saying this for years. He's like, we got everything here. If we find the right manner and to put this all together, it'd be paradise, but they just haven't. So, yeah, and of course, it's been in the news lately that, there's a lot of racial laws. There's been a lot of racial laws in place, too, by the way, for a while, but it's just getting worse and worse. And obviously, when it went from the apartheid regime over to the new government, they had a new constitution. It was a great constitution. It was something that was held up to the rest of the world as look what they were able to accomplish. All parties, were involved in putting that together. It was fantastic. But ever since then, like I said, when Mandela was gone, the honeymoon was over, and it was just one racial law after another racial law that's been passed. So you kind of have now, where you had one set of racial laws on apartheid, you have the exact same thing, but just the opposite under the current government. And that's causing a lot of trouble for investment and foreign investment. And that's one
Mhm.
of the things that Elon Musk talked about and just pointed out of this is what's actually going on. Obviously, it made some headlines, and the U.S. made some decisions of how to treat a regime with certain racial laws on the books.
And everybody's got a story, and everybody's story is unique. But, you mentioned opportunity is one of the reasons people come here. But, obviously at the age of 22, 23, 4 years ago, you made the decision. Was it your entire family? Was it just MC? Tell me just a little bit of what it's like to make a decision to leave the country you've lived in, grown up in, et cetera, probably have family and roots, and go somewhere different. Just talk a little bit about that. I think a lot of people don't grasp the massive decision making that's involved with that.
Yeah, I finished up university in South Africa, and after that, I traveled a bit. I ended up in the US. And I ended up playing here in a rugby league up until 2007. When I was here, the first couple of years, I said, this is a fantastic opportunity. I'm going to play in the league. I get to see the world, meet some amazing people. The rugby community is just quite incredible. You have everyone from lawyers, doctors, every phase of life, white collar, blue collar, everything is in a rugby team, right? And a rugby club, which makes it so much fun. But a great community. So I traveled quite a bit around the US. And as I was traveling, I just started to see more and more opportunity, and I started to see less and less opportunity, in South Africa and also other places that I was interested in. Europe was already on a downslope back then. And this is, 20 something years ago. So I kind of looked at Europe and said, this is headed the completely wrong direction. But as I was traveling, I did a lot of reading. I was that guy on the team bus and the team plane that grabbed a book, studied up on, some business, investing, reading about finance. I started to get interested in that. And my mom had actually given me Robert Kiyosaki's book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, to read because they, at that stage, had a financial advisor and they were involved in a Ponzi scheme or a Madoff scheme or whatever you want to call it in South Africa, lost the majority of their savings. And she had shared the book with me and said, you know what? We've gone one direction in our life financially. We don't have control and we're hurt by this. Here's a book. And my mom read it at that stage that I just read. You should definitely read this because there might be another path for you in doing this. And I read the book and it completely changed the way that I looked at money, how I looked at wealth, capital, what it is, how it works. Massive paradigm shift. And I actually took action and bought real estate, 6 months after reading the book. So I took some of the money that I generated playing sports and doing odd jobs. And then I invested in real estate and I bought the first property, put some tenants in there, collected the rent, paid all the bills. And I was like, wow, this is just like in the book. This is incredible. How many times can I do this? And of course, as you know, then school starts because surprise, surprise, tenants sometimes don't pay their rent or they pay it late, or sometimes they damage your property or they do both. So school started. That was kind of like where that part of the journey started. And then I started to realize too that in the US, it's funny that when people live here, they have a different view of just where the US fits into the world. Like there's opportunities here for business owners and for like investors that you don't have in any other places. There's few places on the planet where you have a tax code that rewards people that build businesses, that solve problems and create value for the marketplace, and also invest in things that other people need or want, like affordable housing and energy and so forth. So at that stage, it was a tough decision, but I'm like, look, South Africa at that stage was going in a different direction. The rest of the world, and I'm like, well, where would I want to position myself and eventually my family, which my entire family is still in South Africa, except my sister. She's in Australia. She married an Aussie. Um, so she lives just outside of Sydney. So it was just me, myself, and I. So I always say, we got to start somewhere. So I came here with backpack, suitcase, a couple $100, and a sense of humor, a sense of adventure, and let's see where this goes. When I started my career on the investment side and building that real estate business, that led to other opportunities, which was quite remarkable, which I don't think would have happened anywhere else.
So is Megan an American girl? Did you come here and
She's an American.
grab one of our women too? Is that what I'm hearing?
That's right. Yes, so she's American. And yeah, one of the things that really played into where I am today too was through the rugby community because I was interested in real estate. And I was really unemployable at this stage too because I was playing sports. So I had to do something on the side. So my thing was like, okay, I'm going to build this real estate company so I have something to retire to when I'm done playing sports. Um, so I started building this real estate business, and through the rugby community, somebody introduced me to another real estate investor. And he's like, "Oh, I heard you're interested in real estate." And explained, "Oh, I was so excited. This young buck. Oh, I just bought my first property." And he's like, "Wait a minute. So you already bought real estate?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "You know what? We have a large portfolio of multifamily buildings. Whenever you have time, when you're not on the road or traveling, just jump in and come and work at some of my buildings. We'll find something for you to do." And that was one of the biggest gifts ever too, because in the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, it says the rich don't work for money, they work to learn. So I'm like, listen, if I get paid $20 for a day, I don't care. I'll be busy and I'll learn something else. So I started picking up trash on their multifamily built properties and eventually did like maintenance, that was involved in apartment turnovers, painting, inside, and eventually running construction crews, doing the leasing of the buildings, and then also eventually got my broker's license as part of acquisitions. So it was such a gift at that stage too, because I'm like, now I look at a multifamily building I know exactly what goes on there from top to bottom. I know what happens during the day. I know what happens during the weekends. I know the type of complaints. I know the characters. They all fall into certain categories. You get them all in those buildings. So it was really a gift for later on. But he also introduced me to, and he came from a very wealthy family. And at lunch, we had these lunches where he would stop by, grab me, pick me up, and we would have lunch. And he would have his CPA and his lawyer with him. And this one day, he had his CPA, his lawyer, and life insurance professional with him. And we had lunch, and I had no idea what the life insurance guy was doing there. I know what the other guys were doing there. And one of the things that he then shared with me afterwards, he said, "Do you know what we kind of discussed?" I'm like, I kind of have an idea. I know what the tax guy does. He minimizes your taxes. I know what the lawyer does. He does all the legal structuring and make sure that you guys are bulletproof, from creditors and predators, but no idea what the life insurance guy does. He comes from a family which was like third generation legacy families. So they had operating businesses. He said, we generate money through our operating businesses. Then we take all that money and we created our own family bank with life insurance. We put all of our money in that. And then we leverage that money through a strategy like a bank. And then we use that money to buy real estate. And that's all we do. We keep it pretty simple. And it confused me even more because his family was a shareholder in a bank, a private bank. And I said, I don't understand. Like, you have a bank. Why wouldn't you put your money in the bank? He goes, no, that's where other people put their money, in our bank. And then we have a strategy there. But for our family bank, we put it all in life insurance. And that led me to this path of infinite banking, which I then incorporated with my real estate. And I started to teach that to other people. And then eventually, it was funny. I found someone, a financial professional that could set these up the way that they were supposed to be set up. And then I would send people to them and they would come back to me and say, well, how do I use this? So I'm like, the coaching part is a pretty big part. So that's when I eventually started my company, Producers Wealth, teaching this, in all 50 states virtually. We did it in 2015 virtually, which is another another story of how we started to do that. And then eventually I started the podcast Cashflow Ninja just the following year after that, because I started having these amazing conversations just with clients. I generate income. And I'm like, can I record this stuff? And eventually they're like, yeah, sure. I'm learning so much of like business and how you generate income and how you invest in multifamily, single family, mobile home parks, fine Scottish whiskey, how you buy an island, like all these different things. And then that's kind of where that show came from.
Well,
That's kind
that's
of where
good.
we,
When people have access to capital,
yeah.
opportunities present themselves to people that are opportunistic. I want to back up just a little bit. There's a couple of foundational things I want to cover, and then I'd like to talk some strategies in the book and some other things here in
Yep.
just a second. What was going on with you around '08? Tell me where you were at, what was going on. I don't know if that was as significant for you as it was for others. Maybe you were living lighter than some other people were, but give me a little bit of what was happening with MC in and around that time.
Yeah. So I was a real estate investor during that time. I managed to survive, but
Woo!
I always said it would be a much better story if I tell everyone that I lost everything and I got blown out and pulled myself back up. But, I was very light at that stage. So I didn't have a ton of properties. But what I also learned was I had an individual I looked at, like all these real estate meetups. I went to meetups at that stage and there was an individual that was kind of like, he was the elder kind of thing. I looked at him kind of as a mentor and he was explaining as this was happening that, look, this is going to be the opportunity of a lifetime. And this was in 2008 and then beginning of 2009, and I was this young puppy just chomping at the bit, just ready to go. So I actually jumped in and I bought stuff at the end of '09, beginning of '10. So I was catching a falling knife, not listening to him because he said, he's one of those, it's almost like that meme with Mel Gibson and Braveheart. It was like, hold, and then charge, right? And I was the young buck that didn't listen, that as he was saying, hold, I was charging. But that was a lesson in itself. And it wasn't that negative. I could have just probably bought a lot more properties had I had waited maybe 1 or 2 years like a lot of those guys did. The other thing that I would also say is that I learned because I was too young for the first big like rug pull in 2000 with the dot com bust. So that was kind of like I wasn't there and I couldn't, I mean, I was still in university, so I didn't really learn a lot from that. But this was the first time that I saw market cycle and the exuberance that was going on. In the real estate game, I mean, you were seeing people selling condos at that stage in Chicago and driving Porsches and Ferraris, like real estate agents, like that are 25 years old. It was insane. The exuberance, the froth, I mean, now I'm like, if I take MC of today to back then, I'd be like, oh, this is the biggest market time. This thing's gonna be ugly. That's what I would be thinking. But at that stage, I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. But I learned a lot of that first big market cycle and the things that I saw. I mean, like you're same thing for you. The things that you probably saw and experienced, I don't think people can just fathom it. I've seen the run up in real estate and multifamily and the other asset classes from 2012. So I would say like the end of 22 when the massive interest rate spikes came, that was a little bit of a rug pull for a lot of people. But for 10 years, you had a run where people that have never been involved in this in investing or in the game, they couldn't lose. So nobody understood what it looked like to lose. But when you're losing, it's bankruptcies, it's divorces, it suicides. I mean, it is ugly, capitalized on a scale I don't think that people can fathom. I did have some, but I learned a lot of lessons during that time that I've continued to apply. I'll give you an example. The last time I saw exuberance, like I saw real estate agents driving Porsches and Ferraris, selling condos in the city of Chicago, was the crypto Super Bowl. The Super Bowl where you had Larry David on FTX commercials saying, "Oh, it'll never work out." You had Matt Damon questioning your manhood if you don't buy crypto on whatever platform he was advertising. The entire Super Bowl was just crypto, crypto, crypto in LA, which there was, I mean, it's just crypto advertisements everywhere. And I looked at this and I'm like, this is just like those 25-year-old real estate agents driving Porsches and Ferraris. This is exactly it, and it became pretty ugly after that.
So that's going to help us lead into a little bit more specific conversation. I want to go back to something you used to describe yourself. You said you're a truth seeker.
Yep.
And one of the things that I think I would put myself in that category too, I don't know if I'm as much a truth seeker or that I hate to be deceived. Those are related, but they're slightly different. Okay.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I want to bring up as we start moving into speaking about some more specific strategies and some things like that, some things you talk about in your book, I actually believe that there is massive deception going on at the macro level. And we
Yep.
could talk a little bit about that. In the US, we're 2+ months into a new president. There's a lot of stuff going on. I don't care which side you're on, there's a lot of stuff going on. I want to talk about macro deception that's
Yep.
out there. We know it is. But there's a statement that I say to myself often, MC, and the statement goes something like this: thou shalt not fool thyself. I believe that micro bias and deception I think they're related. We can't separate them out.
Yep.
But I think most people start fooling themselves. And part of our journey is getting to a place where we could discern what's going on at that macro level so we could weed out some junk and not be deceived and not be brought into the Ponzi schemes, the get rich quick things, and weed through stuff and see what makes sense for us. And that's what I want to preface that question with as we lead into talking about what people need to do. Because
Yep.
I think they need to be able to discern what we're saying. I think people need to be able to listen in and go, you know what? That MC guy's good. I need to research a little bit of this, maybe get his book. And Tim, we've listened to him some, but yeah, I don't know. I don't believe everything he says either. So talk a little bit about deception, macro, micro, whatever you want to talk about. Because I think it's important for people to do that before they start moving into some specific strategies.
Perfect. On a macro scale, big picture right now. If you think about what is happening in the United States, you have a new administration. The Trump administration's coming in. They created the Department of Government Efficiency that's led by Elon Musk. Regardless of where you are on the political front, both of these individuals have been described by media all over the place, left, right, center, you pick it, as the two biggest disruptors in business probably in our lifetime. So regardless of what you think of Donald Trump, if you look at just his career and his history, what he did in real estate and what he was able to accomplish there, and then going into other different industries like reality TV. Reality TV was never the same again after The Apprentice. Probably one of the top rated shows of reality shows of all time. He changed the game. So whatever industry has gone into, latest politics will never be the same again. You cannot put this genie back into the bottle. People thought that politics changed with how Barack Obama introduced social media and helped him in his campaign. What Donald Trump did is he just took this 100x through his strategy. So it'll never be the same. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. And it's the same thing with Elon Musk, whether, fellow South African, whether it's electric cars, whether it's payment processing systems at PayPal, which he started at, then going into
Space,
electric cars,
space.
exploration, the Boring Company. So now you have in charge of the biggest economy, the most powerful country on the face of the world, two of the biggest disruptors in charge of this economy. And so you're going to see disruption at a scale, I don't think, which you have experienced. And that's what we're in the process of right now. There's a lot of outrage media because that's the media cycle now. Everybody has to be outraged on both sides to get attention. Because how do you get attention in such a crazy environment? You almost have to, you have to do crazy things just to get attention. So you're getting a lot of disruption. And the United States, if you think about a big picture, especially, this has been coming for a while, by the way, in the past 20 years. But I would say prior to the Trump administration coming back into office, the Biden administration before that, you already had a massive government, and they just kept adding the size of government. It just kept expanding and expanding. And you had all these ecosystems, I call it, around government, whether it's NGOs, whether it's defense contractors, whether it is also big pharma. These are ecosystems that's part of that system. It just got bigger and bigger under the previous administration, exponentially. So much so that if you look at the jobs that were added, and this is the deception going on, big picture, that everything was added in government. The private sector and small businesses have been suffering and have actually shedded a lot of jobs, and a lot of people stopped being employed by small businesses. And it was all added back onto the government. So government just started getting bigger and bigger. And now you're getting into very, very dangerous territory, because if the government is the main driver of your economy, are you a free market economy at that stage? Are you living in a capitalist society if what the government does and spend dictates your entire economy? So that's what's going on right now. You've got disruption, and you've got two very focused individuals. It's another thing, regardless of where you're at. They're laser focused. And when they have their mind to doing and accomplishing something, they're going to go after it. So that's why you're got a lot of disruption.
One thing related to that before we move on to maybe more micro and people's internal minds. Many people, obviously, I think you and I probably get excited a little bit about disruption. Regardless of where you're at, I'm going, man, this has needed to be busted up for a long time. I don't care where you are. I mean, I'm more libertarian probably if I were to be pinned down, smaller government, less government, get out of our way, that type thing. But there are massive numbers of people that don't want things to change or be disrupted. I doubt they're still listening in, but speak to that for just a second before you go into the micro deception and all that can go on.
Yeah, if you think about the wealth transfer that has happened in the past 25 years, I mean, you could pick different segments. Let's pick one segment, the wars. There's a reason you have had wars that never ever stop. It's money laundering. It's literally money laundering. You're laundering money from the government to defense contractors, which then, by the way, a lot of the people that consult and lobby the government, they are all owners or benefactors from all of this. So there's a lot of money at stake. There's so much money at stake, on the pharmaceutical side, big pharma. That's why you had people that took a family. The Kennedy family has been the darlings of the Democratic Party. Literally, I mean, it's like the royalty. And you had RFK Jr. come in, and I mean, he was persona non grata in their books for coming in because he's also going to, he's going to disrupt that flow of capital, which is the government, again, laundering money to pharmaceutical companies. For lack of a better term, it's contracts, but it's essentially just laundering money from one piece of the economy over to another and enrich a whole bunch of people that is all in the same place. So people don't want anything to change because they want things to stay exactly the same because everybody's had it so good. And think about it, it has been easy street for a while for a lot of people. But if you're not in that ecosystem or in any of these ecosystems, what have you seen? You've seen inflation, which, by the way, that's also deception and a lie. Inflation has been in the mid 20s, 25 to 26%. Why would I say that? There's an AI tool for that. Trueflation is an AI tool that can actually tell you the true inflation. And from 2020 to where we are today, you're on 25, 26%. So that's where, and it's funny when you say that to the average person on the street or people that we talk to, they look at you and they go, yeah, that sounds about right. That's what I experience when I go buy food or go to the grocery store, or things are on average probably about 25 to 30% more. But yet the government will tell you, oh, inflation's around 2 to 3%, right? Which is madness. So that's another big thing. And what else has people seen? They've seen the wealth inequality, which a lot of people is concerning to a lot of people. You want a healthy, thriving middle class, and you would have if there wasn't these games played, big picture, and these ecosystems. But you've seen a hollowing out of the middle class. More and more people are falling out of the middle class. Look, we were ripe for disruption. Sometimes, as an entrepreneur and a business owner, you look at industries that you're like, oh, this should so be disrupted right now. It doesn't provide any value. That's a lot of these systems that I mentioned. And this is what's happening. AI is coming into this too, right? So you have a massive disruptor like AI coming in, which is going to replace a lot of the functions that are just repetitive jobs, which a lot exist in government. So I'll just comment quickly on the global environment. What you're also seeing is that the US has kind of taken a back step as the superpower, the main superpower, and they are reasserting themselves. So when you see these news headlines of, the Panama Canal was in the news, that was a big one. Greenland is now like in the news. So why are all these things in the news? Well, if we go back, to the beginning of our conversation, the number one job of a military, of a superpower, is to protect and facilitate global trade. And these were all bottlenecks that they kind of let go, or, who knows what the story is behind that? One can speculate. But the reality is that the US no longer had control over those bottlenecks. So they're reasserting that. And that's also causing some global disruption, with tariffs and so forth.
I think that one of the things that I'm concerned about, especially looking back at COVID, maybe even going back to '08, going back to 2000, I am concerned that as a culture, and this spills down to the individual, MC, that we've lost our ability to evaluate risk. We can't look at numbers correctly, maybe because of all the deception, or maybe we've been
Yep.
programmed. And I think that's important. I'd like to drive this conversation for our last few minutes down to average Joe. I want to speak over the next 10 plus minutes specifically to average Joe, because he might be seeing all this stuff on the news and he's sitting his head swimming, going, "What the heck does that mean for me?" The stock market up and down, and we just mentioned some things with insurance and alternative investments, and I enjoy crypto and gold and all this kind of stuff. But I think what a lot of people have is they have probably a small amount of money or a small job, and they really have a desire to protect that. And I don't know that they really understand risk, which means evaluating and doing things like that. So I know I just threw a number of things at you, but what I'd love for us to do is start talking to average Joe. What does average Joe need to be looking at right now? Where does he need to be getting information? What does he need to ignore? And what does he need to pay attention to right now? Because there's a bunch of junk out there. So what would you, and you know what? They're not going to study it like you. So I think we need to
No.
admit that. And so talk to someone who's still hanging out with us here. What do they need to do to kind of get, how can they cut through all this crap?
Yeah, so what the advice that I would give to folks too is, like you said, determining risk is very hard right now because there's such a deception going on. Let's use the stock market, for example. There's a terminology or a concept called the Buffett indicator. And the Buffett indicator looks at the size of the stock market in relation to the US economy. Now, currently, the stock market is basically twice the size as the US economy. So what does that mean? That means, in layman's terms, if you're buying a house and the house is worth $250,000 and you're going to buy the house from me, but I said, you know what, the house is actually worth $500,000. You should buy the house from me for $500,000. And you go, okay, well, no one would take that trade ever. You wouldn't buy a $250,000 house for $500,000. But yet that's exactly what people are doing right now if you're using the Buffett indicator of the stock market. Hence why Buffett has gone from chasing yields to just protecting. And if you look at his cash positions, he's sitting in the at Berkshire Hathaway and he's selling off different divisions too, by the way, which he knows this is the top, of a massive bubble. So he's selling off a lot of divisions of Berkshire Hathaway, a lot of the different companies, and he's just positioning cash and holding on to cash. So for the average person, just the stock market is overvalued. There's a lot of different markets that are overvalued. So finding value in this world right now is very hard. And with a lot of disruptions that are coming, this is protection mode. So I would say spend less than you consume, number one. That's the rule number one. Number two, pay yourself first. Put away 10, 15, 20, 30% of your capital, as much as you can, and just accumulate cash. Crypto will also get hit with disruption. I still think crypto is going to do very, very well. But don't be surprised if the crypto market gets cut in half at some point in time. This is not a negative against crypto. It's very liquid, very easy to sell off when you need money, right? And then gold and silver, that's been money for centuries. Being from South Africa, the home of the Krugerrand, you're not going to have to convince me about gold. I love gold and silver. I think that's going to be money for centuries and has been for centuries. But the big thing right now, the average person can do is spend less than you consume, accumulate as much cash as possible, sit tight, because, think about trying to get 6 to 12 months of your household expenses just saved. And if you're a business owner, same thing. Save as much cash as you can, build a system, that we talk about, the infinite banking system, where you become the banker for your business. So you could set up life insurance contracts to do that, and you never have to go into a bank begging ever again. You have your own banking system. So that's what I would recommend for the average person, the average business owner, is now's the time for efficiency and just accumulating and putting away cash. If you think about what Doge is doing in the US economy, think about doing a Doge in your own household, your personal economy and your business economy. Try to be as efficient as possible, cut back on areas that are maybe a little bit of an overkill, and just accumulate cash because that's going to come in handy for you.
So if you have a few kids, maybe consider farming them out and doing something like that.
Put
Is
them,
that what
put
you're
them to
saying? Did I
work.
hear? It'd be nice if they could start, earning their keep and all, right? That would be a good thing. No, I actually think the people that are keeping their head clear are going to be positioning themselves.
Yep.
The people that are reading books, like we'll talk about here in just a second before we finish up, Get Wealthy for Sure, maybe listening in here, listening over at Cashflow Ninja, that are pursuing things, not living in that. I mean, listen, you could spend every bit of your time listening to all the gory details about what's happening in Washington, D.C. right now.
Yep.
As for me, I've got some other stuff that I need to do, and I don't need my head clear. Yeah, I know what's going on. I don't need to listen to people talk about it and all. So that brings up a quick question before we talk about the book and kind of start wrapping here. Where do you get some of your information, and where do you recommend average Joe stay away from and gather information? Because he can't talk to you all the time. They can listen to our podcast, which I think is a great thing. But where do you get your info?
There's some it's very, very hard. Number one, there's some news sources that you can follow. Zero Hedge is one of them that I follow. Just like look at it daily. It just gives you the big headlines for the day kind of thing. I also organized my Twitter X as it goes by now, just to get the news headlines quickly. And I scroll through and I could do that all in 5 minutes a day. But really where I found a lot of value is paid newsletters. That's the one thing that, everybody likes the free information, but you're the product with free information. Just remember that. So a lot of newsletters I subscribe to just to kind of get to the bottom of what's actually going on, getting some deep, thought-provoking analysis of global events, the global economy, US economy, where things are headed. But yeah, I'm the same as you. I spend about 5 minutes looking at the headlines because I also look at the news headlines like this. This is what they want everybody else to believe is happening. It is good to understand what the average person's perceptive of what is actually happening, because that's what they want you to believe, what's in the news headlines. So it's kind of good to get those too, just to kind of know what's the national conversation like or the international conversation.
Get Wealthy for Sure, the number one financial strategy for business owners to multiply wealth predictably. I did 2 turn downs in here. One turn down, you said specifically, this is a book about using whole life insurance policy with mutual insurance company to store your excess capital, become your own bank. And then I kind of like the portion over here where you talk about the family offices. Tell me why the book, what it's about, and where people can get it and all of that as we're wrapping up here.
Yeah, so most people talk the world right now, news headlines, again, which is very crazy, but it's all about getting rich quick. And I've been looking for that for 25 years. I haven't found it. If you do find it, please reach out to me and let me know where I can find it too. But I don't see anything as a get rich quick. The only way to build true, sustainable, multi-generational wealth is through discipline and following proven systems. So in the book, I talk about the Get Wealthy for Sure financial strategy, which is the number one financial strategy for business owners to multiply their wealth predictably. That system has a track record of 170 years. It's something that I've personally done for 15 years. It takes discipline, resilience, and it's setting up a smarter system, working smart and hard simultaneously for you. In the book, I just share how you could set up your very own banking system for yourself, your business, also your family. And then I get into the components of what are some of the secrets of the Rockefellers? How do they use this? And how do they maximize their family bank? And you can too. You don't have to be a Rockefeller to do what the Rockefellers do. So I talk about how to create legacy assets for your family, how to set up tax, legal, and insurance structures, how to create a family bank just like the Rockefellers, how to manage assets like billionaires. There's a spoiler alert. They actually look at 100 years or more when they invest. They pick, 10 or fewer areas of investment and they stick with it. And then also how to do family masterminds, just like the Rockefellers and the Rothschild families, because that's the glue that keeps the family kind of together. But in the book, I talk about this strategy, which I call the Get Wealthy for Sure. So I'd rather do the Get Wealthy for Sure than the Get Rich Quick. And if people want a copy of the book, they could go to getwealthyforsure.com. Right now, we're doing an offer where when you request a paperback book, we'll ship the book for you. The book's for free. You just pay for the shipping and handling. And at the getwealthyforsure.com link, there's also videos of where we do deep dives and strategies showing you exactly how this actually works for those that are interested in, diving into it. And there's also a link if you want to set up a call with myself and my team and explore options for yourself. You'll be able to book a call with us there. It's at getwealthyforsure.com.
I'm sure you're going deep into a lot of this stuff over at Cashflow Ninja. Tell us briefly about that.
Yeah, so Cashflow Ninja is my podcast, and we have over 1,000 shows at cashflowninja.com, and we've covered over 120 different cash flow investment niches. Everything from multifamily mobile home parks to fine Scottish whiskey, how to buy an island. It's everything. We have gone everywhere, literally everywhere. It's funny. I always put out an email to, if you know about something that I haven't covered, let me know. And we still get a couple of those, but all those information is available at cashflowninja.com.
How to make money while traveling around the country in an RV. How about that one?
There you go. That'll be a good one.
Hey, final question. I'd love for you to do this for us. We talked about a lot of big stuff, a lot of big topics. I think it's been light for some people, but maybe could have been burdensome. Just kind of as a last comment here, MC, just encourage somebody that might just be kind of overwhelmed. We know they need to pick up the book and maybe go listen to other things, but just give somebody some encouragement if they're looking out there going, man, I don't know how I'm going to get my act together financially. There's just too much going on. Give them a good word to make them feel good.
Yeah, a lot of the media and information you receive about finance and money, it's all terrible. It's not designed for you, and it's designed to confuse you, to get you a kind of slightly feeling depressed because you're like, I don't even understand what they're saying. They don't want you to understand what they're saying. What they want you to do is just come to them and give them your money. So if you're listening to this and you go, I don't know how to do this, it seems complicated, I will tell you that a farm boy from South Africa can figure this out. And I know I spent a lot of time with it, but it doesn't have to be complicated. It's actually very, very simple if you think about it. And when you actually try to get advice from people that will explain it to you in the most simplest manner, easily understandable. I try to explain things so that my kids can understand it, right? And they're 8 and 6. So it doesn't have to be complicated. You just start where you're at, spend less than what you make. Number one, consume a little bit less, start building that nest egg, start putting money away. And before you know it, you will have enough capital to start, maybe create your own banking system. Every day, the move in the right direction, doing little things will compound over time. It does with your health. It does with money. It does with good habits. It'll compound over time. And within 12 to 18 months, you will have no idea how you even got to where you are, but you would be in a completely different situation.
That's good. And I want to remind people, not just a farm boy from South Africa, but MC's a rugby player, which probably means he's taking some hits to the head over the course of his. I've seen some rugby, man.
100% correct.
No pads. These folks get beat to a pulp. MC Laubscher, thank you so much. The book is Get Wealthy for Sure. Here's a copy for those people who might be watching it on YouTube. We'll include some links down below, also links over to Cashflow Ninja. Thank you for joining us, MC. I've loved this conversation. We had some great conversations about all that's going on in the world. I think it's been helpful to people just to hear two guys rip on that. We are Seek, Go, Create here. We've got new episodes every Monday. Make sure you're tuned in and commenting over on YouTube, on all the podcast platforms. We love having conversations like this just to share what's going on. And as MC said earlier, he's a truth seeker. We are Seek, Go, Create. That fits right into that. We'll see you next week.